Hi, it's Elise here at Bowman Library with a whole new teen book spotlight. So for this week, we are going back in time to a very specific decade. We are going back to the 1920s. We are going back to the roaring 20s. So we have a great mixture of fiction and nonfiction this week. And what I love about this decade is there is so much that goes on. It is crazy. You're gonna see some of the stuff that we talk about. There's a ton of things going on, so let's get started. Our first one is Vixen. So it's 1920s in Chicago, and there are three main characters in our book that we meet. First, there's Gloria. She's a socialite who's engaged to the city's most eligible bachelor, Sebastian Gray, but she wants more out of life. She's bored. There has to be something more than just being a socialite and being engaged. And then there's her cousin Clara. She's up from the country, visiting with Gloria and helping her plan her upcoming wedding, and she also kind of has a little bit of a shady past to her. And then there's also Gloria's best friend Lorraine, who's in love with someone, but he has no feelings for her, so there's all that goes with it. Their lives start to change though when Gloria decides that she's gonna liven things up, and she decides she's gonna go visit the city's hottest speakeasy. And not only does she start visiting it more often, she also happens to fall in love with the band's piano player, who also happens to be black, which was a social no-no at that time. And then scandals and drama ensue, changing all of their lives forever. If you love your historical fiction heavy on romance and drama, then this is the one for you. This is Vixen. Harlem Summer by Walter Dean Myers, and I love me some Walter Dean Myers. If you've read anything by him, you know that this one's just automatically gonna be good. So this is all about 16-year-old Mark. He loves to play a saxophone, and that it is 1925. That's all he wants to do. But unfortunately, it doesn't pay a lot of money, and at the time, having a quote real job didn't really pay a ton either. So when he is offered to have a whole $5 to complete a job, he knows it has to be illegal, but he signs on when he finds out that his musician idol is going to be involved. All he has to do is there's a truck coming with some illegal whiskey, because alcohol was illegal at the time with Prohibition. And the truck that's carrying this whiskey, though, goes missing. And Mark is blamed. He becomes the fall guy. And it's going to be up to him to set things right with the mobsters, or he will pay with his life. And it just gets more complicated from there. Set during the Harlem Renaissance, he'll be along on this crazy adventure with Mark as he tries to survive the only way he knows how, all while just trying to keep his dreams alive. This is Harlem Summer. So the Poisoner Handbook. Okay, so if you've watched enough of these, you know I love nonfiction. We have some amazing nonfiction this week that we're going to talk about, starting with this one. And what I love about this one is, if we were taught this stuff in school that we were to learn in here, school would have been so much better. Because here's the deal with this book. It is part true crime, it's part science, it's part history of forensic medicine. So all the way back in the Jazz Age in the 1920s, the most popular method of murder at the time was using poison, because it was basically undetectable. The tests that we have today weren't developed. A lot of times, you couldn't detect it. The person would have to be living to still try to figure out, like, it had a special smell or something. And a lot of the times, the death that poisons cause looked like, natural causes. If someone had a heart attack, or they just stopped breathing, or, stuff happens. But when Charles Norris is named chief medical examiner for New York City, he decides he wants to do something about this mass epidemic of poison murders, and then the birth of forensic medicine occurs. Each chapter is named after a type of poison that was used at the time and features an actual true crime from the 1920s about how that person was killed using that poison, and then it also explains how the crime was solved with the development of a detection test for each special poison. Again, I loved this book. I learned so much about medicine and how things worked at the time. So good. Highly recommend this one. This is the Poisoner's Handbook. Another amazing nonfiction. This is Bootleg. So this is all about the rise and fall of Prohibition. So this takes us a little bit before the 1920s, but it starts right when the St. Valentine's Day Massacre occurs. And if you're not familiar with that, it was a crazy gangster then. Al Capone and his associates went and shot up a whole bunch of other gangsters. It was this whole crazy thing on Valentine's Day in Chicago. And then we didn't take a look at what led Americans up to wanting alcohol to be made illegal. And when it became an official, national law. Alcohol was illegal. That was called Prohibition. People did what they had to do in order to make sure people still got their hands on it, even though they technically could not be able to. And that is what this is all about. You might have heard about moonshine before and stuff. This is when this all really kind of took off. And I'm going to tell you right now, some of the stuff they used to make the alcohol, if you go back to the Poisoner Handbook, some of the stuff that you find out in here, I would not have been drinking it. It was filled with poisons and chemicals and all sorts of things you can't even begin to imagine. But you will read about all the players involved, like Al Capone, Carrie Nation, even J. Edgar Hoover, the person who was in charge of creating the FBI, as well as the rise of gangsters and how they ruled the cities. That's what happened. The gangsters took over, they made the speakeasies, they had the alcohol, they ran the cities. Filled with photos, primary sources, you will be left wondering the question as to whether or not Prohibition worked. Was it a success or a failure, especially considering that years later, it was officially repealed and that law no longer exists. This is Bootleg. Bright young things. So it is 1929 in New York City. This is the time and place where worlds collide as everyone wants to go to New York City because if they can make it there, in the words of Frank Sinatra, they can make it anywhere. So best friends Cordelia and Letty, they know they need to leave their small town in Ohio. Just after hours, Cordelia gets married to someone, the two of them run away to New York City where their dreams of stardom and wealth are going to come true. Basically, as soon as they arrive, though, they have this epic falling out. The girls decide to go their separate ways, leading them on two completely different paths. Letty eventually gets a job as a cigarette girl, so she's selling cigarettes at one of the most popular speakeasies. And speakeasies were the illegal places where people went and got illegal alcohol. So they were always on the edge of being caught. And then we have Cordelia, who ends up finding her wealthy and estranged father, and soon she is sucked into the world and all of that drama that comes with it. The first in a series, you will want to continue the adventures, the drama, the romance through the end of the decade with our main characters in the follow-up books. This is Bright Young Things. And our last one is one of my new favorite non-fiction books. I'm so excited. This book was great. There's a young adult reader's version coming out in November, which I cannot wait for. This is Killers of the Flower Moon. And again, this is one of those nonfiction books where, why aren't we told about this? But now you need to read this book. So in the 1920s in Oklahoma, there was this first American tribe known as the Osage Nation. They were incredibly wealthy because the land they held was filled with oil. And when this oil was discovered, it was their land. They were the ones who subleased it. They made the money off this oil. And there were some people that did not think they deserved to have it and they wanted it for themselves. So in 1921, two Osage Indians disappear, and soon after their bodies are found. And then over the next 5 years, at least 22 more people that we know of had the same fate. Facing incredible public outcry as to why this was happening and nothing was being done to stop it, solve it, prevent it, the federal government ended up getting involved. And they created this small law enforcement branch of the Justice Department to solve all of this. Not expecting them to do anything though, this small group starts sifting through all this evidence. And what they find was a level of corruption, cover-ups, and deception that went all the way up the national level into realms of the government that never should have been in. And eventually this small branch that wasn't supposed to do anything became the FBI. So this true story is one that you probably have never heard of, but again, you need to. It will blow your mind. It will make you like sit back and wonder like, how did this all happen and why did it take so long for us to figure this out? This is Killers of the Flower Moon. So these are just 6 little books that we have here that are set in the 1920s, about the 1920s, all that good stuff. So I encourage you to come on out, check out one of these, or we have others. If there's something else in the 1920s you want to read about that we didn't talk about today, I bet we have a book or 2 on it. So you're more than welcome to come on down and we will help you find that perfect book. I hope you have a great week and tune back next week when we have a whole new teen book spotlight.